The first takeaway point that I had from the Marsh text was that the leaders capitalized upon all opportunities that they had to influence. For example, Martin Luther King Jr., in his first year at his church, preached 46 times to his own congregation, did 7 guest sermons at other churches, and did 13 lectures for secular groups. Whether you're a pastor, a healthcare provider, the organizer of a farm like Jordan was, the organizer of an organization like the SNCC, a pastor, a government official, whatever that role is, if you're in a position of potential power, then you have opportunity to influence and therefore leverage your power for good. You can leverage your power for justice. You can leverage your power to fulfill God's theology by fulfilling the gospel of love and justice, therefore bringing glory to God. And you can leverage your power to establish God's kingdom on earth, which will require that you do so with community in mind. Community completely informs our ability to leverage power because you first of all have to know and be cognizant of and responsive to the needs of your community, but you also have to know with whom in your community you can successfully partner to make this happen. And lastly, you need to be able to identify and be strategic about how you maybe go up against some of the people in your community or systems in the community that will be a barrier to establishing God's kingdom, fulfilling justice, and fulfilling his theology. All of the leaders that were highlighted in the text were able to mobilize people to get results. My favorite quote is on page 23, where it says that Jesus was not merely a utopian dreamer, but the incarnate truth of God, enabling the church and its people to work and fight and to keep talking. What I love about this is, first of all, that use of incarnate. It empowers all of us to envision ourselves as the incarnation of God. But I also love that word enabling, where God enables and really gives us the authority through Jesus to carry out God's theology on earth, to establish justice and to do so in a sense of community. It also challenges us to not just be satisfied with an instant result or a band-aid to a problem, but to keep fighting and to keep talking, keep the conversation going. In the text, it said that love is not enough to transform a system. Therefore, there has to be some degree of work and effort, and again, capitalizing upon opportunity to influence to make that happen. The second main takeaway that I got from the text was that these leaders were all strategic. I had a flashback of Esther in the Old Testament. Esther didn't just pounce upon her first opportunity to influence her husband to bring about the change that she felt called to do. Instead, she was patient, she played the game as she had to, and then at the right moment, kind of made her move. I see this played out by Martin Luther King Jr., where he knew his audience, he studied his church, and he knew what he needed to do to be charismatic and influential with them, much unlike his predecessor, who was a bit of a loose cannon and therefore not as effective in using his opportunities to influence because he didn't have a strategy on how he was going to do so. What we see in Jordan is that he was strategic in utilizing patience with his farm community. There was an initial fulfilling of a mission and then a period of time where he had to patiently wait until it was revealed to him or apparent to him what that next mission or focus would be for his group to bring about social justice. In order for any of these leaders to bring about justice, they had to be able to enlist others, and that's where community comes into play. Now, in the example of King and the SNCC, they enlisted the help of secular organizations and non-Christians. Their end games or goals were rather specific in that they wanted to bring about policy change. Those sorts of goals or results are appealing because they're measurable, they're tangible, and you can see some immediate improvement or change with it. But in contrast, Perkins had a little bit different strategy and different end game. He did not speak of a universal brotherhood where he was intentionally partnering with non-believers, but rather was focused more on ideals versus the results. And in his voice of Calvary Group, they were truly focused more on born-again faith and changing hearts. The fusion of the two would be Jordan, where he acknowledged that sometimes you have to play the game with the sinful establishments, systems, and people around you, but that settling for that isn't enough. I loved his analogy of the mule when he said if you just trade out one politician for another, you just get a different one-eyed mule. He had a great interaction with a congregation member where he said, are you going to follow your granddaddy or are you going to follow Jesus? Again, focusing on the theology of the gospel and what Jesus taught and did and said. He said that changing the rules is okay, but it's not enough. That, again, you have to have a focus on the theology, on the transformation of heart, and on the born-again faith. All of these are a little bit different. Nothing is right or wrong, but how they partnered with people and community to be strategic to bring about their results and their end games were all very different, again, because their end games were different. The third thing that I noted was that a commonality in all of these social justice leaders is that their theology was gospel-centric. So in looking at what Jesus did, said, and taught, Perkins perhaps said it best, where he said that a redistribution of wealth is the faithful embodiment of agape. Jesus talked about money and economic, social justice more than any other topic. He also said that we have to change and be mindful of the economics, otherwise the validity of the rest of the gospel is completely at stake. If we are going to faithfully embody Christ, and if we are going to be the incarnation of God, then we have to be rooted in the theology of the gospel, which is the theology of love. It is the theology of justice, and it absolutely requires that we be mindful, aware, cognizant of, and respondent to community, that we know how to partner strategically, and that we use our influence to bring about good, that we leverage our potential power to bring about good in making changes in those in our community that might be barriers to bringing God's kingdom down to earth. So those are my 3 observations: opportunity to influence, strategic actions, and then a gospel-centric approach. How I could see our church changing for the better would be to embrace the deeper tiers of service. So in my own head, I have this concept of tiers of service where the top superficial tier is donating money or items. The second tier would be one-time or temporary ministries, where maybe you go and serve in a soup kitchen once, or you go on a trip, mission trip. One of the classes I'm in right now is Kara Powell's on adolescent faith longevity, and she refers to these sorts of service ministries as drive-by services, where it feels good and it looks good, and you might have a temporary change of heart, but the change is not lasting, and it doesn't lead to longevity in youth faith, or likely for the faith of anyone involved at any age. So what I would propose is that we seek out opportunities to get to that deeper level, that third tier, where we have true advocacy, relationship building, and transformation of hearts. Now, in our church right now, we have a lot of small group ministry, but these groups were formed by people that are like-minded and in similar places in life and circumstances, so that we've essentially become a church with a lot of well-functioning cliques. And in my opinion, if you keep eating the same thing you've been fed, you will not be transformed. So my suggestion is that our church would take a note from Marsh on having a paradigm shift where we do what King did and the SNCC did, what Jordan tried to do on his farm, that we bring people together that have something to learn from each other. Perhaps we pair a high school girl with an 80-year-old in the assisted living facility, or perhaps we pair empty nester couples that are financially successful or business owners with young couples that are just starting out, so that people can learn from each other, they can inform each other, and leave the relationship or continue in the relationship with a transformed heart. It's truly through advocacy and relationships that we can have the most long-lasting impact of transforming our personal theologies as well as bringing about long-term social justice, versus just doing one-time feel-good service projects or gathering with people that will tell us what we already know and want to hear.